The Panama Canal is one of the most magnificent and ambitious engineering works in the history of the Americas. This marvel of engineering connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific through an ingenious system of locks which raise ships 26 meters above sea level. When a ship passes through the lock system, the canal loses a total of 200 million liters and runs the risk of drying up. But how can they lift a ship that weighs more than 53,000 tons? In this video, we will find out how the Panama Canal works. For hundreds of years, having to go around South America cost time, money, and lives. But in 1914, one of the most expensive and ambitious engineering projects in the history of the Americas was inaugurated, the Panama Canal. Since its opening, more than 1 million ships have traveled this route. Connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans by waterway was humanity's dream for more than 500 years. Joining these two bodies of water would represent an extraordinary advantage. It would save ships a travel distance of 20,000 kilometers and 2 weeks of travel. Thanks to the canal, ships can sail from the Atlantic to the Pacific in just 8 hours, which is 40 times faster than the journey around Cape Horn. Every year, about 14,000 ships pass through the 80 kilometers of the Panama Canal, transporting 172 million tons. In addition, this transcontinental corridor generates significant revenue for the Panamanian government, bringing in $2 billion annually in tolls. The larger ships can end up paying more than $500,000 to cross the canal. It all begins when a container ship approaches Lemon Bay, the Caribbean entrance to the Panama Canal. It left Israel 3.5 weeks ago, carrying containers toward China. It sails through the Atlantic Ocean heading to the Pacific. The main obstacle on its route is the American continent. While traveling from New York to Los Angeles through the canal takes 10 days, going around South America takes 24 days, which means a difference of 14 days. Although the Panama Canal is already 100 years old, it remains essential for global trade. This man-made trade route faces a significant challenge. To reach Panama City on the Pacific coast, the ship must pass through a series of complicated and narrow channels and locks. The narrowness of the canal contrasts with the size of the ship, which is larger than the Titanic, weighing over 53,000 tons. It belongs to a special generation of ships known as Panamax ships, the largest ones capable of passing through the canal. Since it's very dangerous to navigate in the dark, the ship has only 8 hours to cross it before night falls. To cross in time, the expertise of a specialist is required. The Panama Canal is the only place in the world where a captain must give up command of his vessel. At this point, the captain, who has been guiding ships through the canal for 16 years, steps in. But even for him, steering such a large ship is a challenge because of the vessel's enormous size. Today, there is a second pilot who will assist the captain through the canal. Navigating the canal is a highly specialized job and is under a lot of pressure from start to finish. The slightest mistake could result in something catastrophic. On a normal day, about 306 ships cross the canal in both directions, carrying 450,000 tons of cargo from the Atlantic side of the canal. The ship will have to cross 3 locks, which will raise the vessel 26 meters and lead it to Lake Gatun. On the other side of the lake, another set of locks will lower the ship until it is at sea level to exit into the Pacific. Building the Panama Canal was the most impressive project of its time and remains one of the greatest engineering feats ever accomplished. It all began in 1880 when the French tried to build a canal at that location, but they failed spectacularly, and in the attempt, 20,000 workers died. Landslides, torrential rains, and diseases were the main problems. The United States resumed the work from where the French had left off, but the Americans had a brilliant idea. Instead of digging out the land completely, they decided to remove part of those enormous mountains and flood the entire stretch of land with water. It was a superhuman effort, full of problems, including diseases and landslides that cost the lives of another 5,000 men. 1 hour after entering the canal, The ship had advanced 11 kilometers from the Caribbean entrance. It is approaching its main challenge, the Gatun Dam. 1 kilometer into the canal, the ship encounters the first set of locks. Each lock has 3 independent yet connected chambers. The Gatun Dam consists of 3 interconnected locks that connect the Atlantic side of the canal with Gatun Lake, which is 26 meters above sea level. The problem is that, at over 300 meters long, Panamax ships are as large as the lock itself. The ship is 300 meters long, and the lock measures 320 meters, so there isn't much room to spare. The problem isn't just about maneuvering a ship, but also the fact that it's carrying a heavy load of 66,000 tons. If it gets damaged, it won't be able to sail, and if the lock is damaged, the Panama Canal is closed. To make matters worse, the pilots have to steer the ship from the bridge, which is more than 220 meters from the bow, a cabin from which they can barely see. It takes 30 minutes to maneuver the ship to the entrance of the lock. Some tugboats are responsible for positioning the ship when it enters the first chamber. Specialized workers throw lines to attach the 2.5 centimeter thick steel cables to the bow and stern of the ship. The cables are connected to 2 powerful locomotives, known as mules, which run on both sides of the canal. Each of these 50-ton mules tows ships up to 100 times their own weight, and together they slowly slide the ship into position. Each locomotive can tow 32 tons and costs $2 million. The captain is nervous. His ship is 32 meters wide. The lock chamber is only 33.5 meters wide, leaving less than 1 meter of clearance on each side. The maneuver requires the precision of a surgeon. A hit inside the chambers could rupture the hull, and the canal would have to be closed. Constantly adjusting the tension of the cables, the locomotives keep the ship centered in the chamber. Their movement must be perfectly synchronized so that the cables remain tight. With the ship moored and safe, the lock operator closes the Caribbean gates. The gates close, holding back the ocean water. These massive gates are more than 2 meters thick and are designed to remain closed even under the pressure of the lock's water. Once closed, the workers open the valves and fill the chamber with fresh water from Lake Gatun to raise the ship. Gravity causes the water from the lake to reach the lock chamber. Through about 100 holes located at the bottom, the incoming water begins to lift the ship up to the level of the next chamber. The water must flow in at a steady rate. Otherwise, turbulence could smash the ship against the sides and break the steel cables under half a ton of tension, with such force that it could cut a person in half. It takes only 8 minutes for 80 million liters of water to be poured into the lock, raising the ship by 8 meters. Once the ship has been raised, the locomotives move up to the next chamber. Next, the 680-ton gates open, but there are still 18 meters to go. So, the locomotives take the ship to the middle chamber, and the process repeats itself. The process is repeated until the ship reaches the level of the lake, 26 meters above the Atlantic. Then it releases the ropes that keep it attached to the mules and continues its way toward Gatun Lake. The first stage of the journey inside the Panama Canal has already been completed, but it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and there are only 5 hours of daylight left. To navigate through the dangerous stretches of the canal, it's necessary to hurry to cross Gatun Lake. This 431 square kilometer freshwater lake, which at its time was the largest artificial body of water, is almost 3 times larger than that of. The lake is the great engine that drives the canal. It pumps almost 200 million liters of water into the locks to raise and lower each ship that crosses it. With daily traffic of up to 40 ships, about 7.5 billion liters are pumped in a single day. The lake was created as a result of the construction of the immense Gatun Dam, weighing 27 million tons over the Chagres River. The Chagres River is vital for supplying water to the canal, because every time a ship passes through the lock system, the canal loses a total of 200 million liters. If this problem wasn't fixed, Gatun Lake would eventually dry up completely and the Panama Canal would be shut down. Luckily, the lost water is recovered from the river to make sure the canal doesn't dry up little by little. When they built the dam, they also constructed a large hydroelectric power plant, which generates enough energy to ensure the operation of the canal system. It's been 5 hours inside the canal, and the ship reaches the last stretch of Lake Gatun. There are only 30 kilometers left to reach the Pacific, but now they face another challenge. The ship has reached the narrowest part of the entire canal, known as the Culebra Cut. In the construction of the canal, the Culebra Cut represents the greatest engineering feat of all. The scale of the work was impressive. A large amount of dynamite was used to blast millions of tons of rock and open a channel through a mountain range. A gigantic explosion left an 18-meter hole in the Gamboa dike. 6,000 men worked to transport the rocks under the constant threat of landslides. Once the 13-kilometer-long Culebra Cut had been built, the water from Gatun Lake immediately rushed toward the Culebra Cut, joining the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. For the first time after 3 tense hours, the ship leaves the Culebra Cut, but its pilots still cannot relax. It is already 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there are only 2 hours of daylight left. The next step will be to guide the ship through the Pedro Miguel and Miraflores locks. These 2 locks will lower it back to sea level and allow it to continue its route through the last 5 kilometers of the canal. They operate using exactly the same procedure as the Gatun lock, but in reverse. As the ship enters the lock system, the combination of gravity, valves, and gates lowers the ship 26 meters, returning it to sea level. Finally, it can head toward the Pacific Ocean. The ship's passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific took only 8 hours, which means 14 days less than it would have taken a century ago. And that was today's video. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel.